We often talk about love as the most powerful force in the world, and it is when it's done right. But what we rarely talk about is how love, when misused or misunderstood, can be just as destructive as it is beautiful. And the most toxic kind of love isn't loud. It's not always abusive in obvious ways. Sometimes the most toxic love is quiet, subtle. It hides behind good intentions and unspoken pain. It's the kind of love that refuses to own its impact. Love without accountability isn't love. It's emotional recklessness. You can care for someone, even deeply, but if you refuse to acknowledge how your actions or your silence affect them, that's not caring. That's denial. That's ego. And that kind of love is dangerous. When someone says, "That's not what I meant," they're trying to protect their intention. But impact isn't about what we meant. It's about what actually happened. Maybe you didn't mean to ignore your partner's feelings. Maybe you didn't intend to make them feel alone. But if they do, that feeling is real. And love demands that we stop and say, "I see you, I hear you, and I take responsibility for how I've made you feel." Love without accountability is not love at all. It's a form of emotional neglect disguised as affection. When we talk about what makes love last, we often focus on communication, trust, or passion, but there's a deeper truth we don't say enough. Without accountability, love begins to rot from the inside out. It decays quietly, often unnoticed at first, until one day someone wakes up feeling empty in a relationship that used to feel full. At its core, love is not just about how we feel, it's about how we behave. You can care deeply for someone and still hurt them if you're unwilling to take responsibility for your actions. You can say, "I love you" every day and still damage the person you say it to if you constantly dismiss their needs, ignore their emotions, or defend your behavior instead of owning it. Love becomes toxic not because of conflict, but because of the refusal to be responsible for the effects of that conflict. Love becomes toxic when one or both partners consistently avoid the mirror. Accountability means being aware of your impact. It means understanding that your words, your choices, and your silences carry weight. And in relationships, that weight is magnified. What you do matters more. What you don't do, that matters even more. When someone expresses hurt and the response is defensiveness, when "I didn't mean to" is used to shut down rather than open up, that moment becomes a brick in the wall that slowly separates two people. Over time, enough of those moments stack up and form a fortress where love cannot breathe. When there's no accountability, pain goes unacknowledged. When pain goes unacknowledged, it festers. That festering becomes emotional decay. The relationship might still function on the surface. Meals are shared, texts are exchanged, smiles are worn for others to see, but underneath, something essential is dying. Intimacy withers. Safety erodes. One or both people begin to feel like they're walking on eggshells, not because the other person is abusive, but because the space between them no longer feels emotionally secure. And the tragedy is that it doesn't have to be this way. So much damage could be prevented if we simply asked ourselves more often, how did what I just said or did land with the person I love? That question alone is a game changer. It shifts the focus from intention to impact. It moves us out of ego and into empathy. It creates space for repair instead of resistance. The truth is, relationships are not ruined by flaws. They're ruined by the inability to admit them. Everyone messes up. Everyone slips. But when we have the strength to say, "I see how that hurt you, and I'm sorry," we begin to build something resilient, something strong, something real. Accountability doesn't weaken love. It proves it. It says, "I care enough about you to hold myself to a higher standard." That kind of love doesn't decay, it deepens. In the end, it's not about being perfect. It's about being willing. Willing to listen, to learn, to grow. Willing to sit in the discomfort of your own missteps without making it about shame or guilt. Willing to repair again and again. Love that is accountable is love that lasts. Love that isn't is just a performance. And performances, no matter how convincing, always end. Silence in the face of hurt is often mistaken for strength. It's praised as maturity, labeled as not making things worse, or seen as keeping the peace. But the truth is, silence isn't always noble. Sometimes silence is just avoidance wearing a mask. When someone is hurt and that pain is met with silence, no acknowledgement, no apology, no effort to understand, what they learn is that their feelings are inconvenient. They learn that their pain doesn't matter enough to disrupt the status quo. It's easy to stay silent. It's far more comfortable to brush past uncomfortable moments than it is to confront them. But avoiding the discomfort of emotional responsibility doesn't make it disappear, it just buries it. And buried pain doesn't go away, it festers. It shows up later as resentment, mistrust, distance, and confusion. A person might stop bringing up their needs, not because they feel heard, but because they've realized it's pointless. They start to withdraw, to shrink, to doubt whether their emotions are even valid. And this silent erosion of connection is far more damaging than any honest conflict could ever be. When we silence ourselves or others in the face of hurt, we're not choosing peace, we're choosing fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of being wrong, fear of being seen. And ironically, it's that very fear that drives the relationship further into instability. Because real peace doesn't come from avoiding the storm. It comes from walking through it together, hand in hand with honesty and courage. You don't build strong relationships by pretending everything is fine. You build them by saying something isn't right, let's talk about it. Many people were raised in environments where emotional expression was either punished or ignored. So naturally, silence became a form of protection. But in adult relationships, that protection becomes a wall. And walls don't just keep others out, they keep love out too. Vulnerability requires presence. It requires the courage to say, I'm hurting, and the grace to respond with, I want to understand. When we stay silent instead, we send the opposite message. I don't care enough to engage. Whether that's the intention or not, that's the impact. And in relationships, impact always speaks louder than intent. There's also a common belief that bringing up hurt only leads to more conflict, so silence seems like the safer option. But unspoken tension doesn't disappear, it accumulates. The more we ignore small injuries, the more those wounds compound. A moment of disappointment turns into a pattern of emotional neglect. A single ignored concern becomes a story of not being valued. Silence tells the hurt person they're alone in the relationship, even if someone is physically there beside them. Being silent in the face of hurt isn't peaceful. It's a form of abandonment. It leaves one person carrying the weight of the relationship's emotional labor while the other hides from discomfort. And that imbalance eventually breaks trust. The hurt person stops reaching out. They stop believing that anything will change. The relationship becomes a performance instead of a partnership. Healing. Connection and intimacy only happen when we stop avoiding and start engaging. When we replace silence with conversation, when we're willing to feel awkward, to feel unsure, to not have the perfect words, but to show up anyway, that's what love looks like in action. In the end, peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of understanding. And understanding only happens when silence gives way to truth. If we truly care about someone, we will not meet their pain with silence. We will meet it with presence, with patience, and with the willingness to say, I'm here. Let's face this together. We like to believe that our intentions are what define us. We think that as long as we didn't mean to hurt someone, that it shouldn't be a big deal. We lean on phrases like, that wasn't my intention, or I didn't mean it that way, as if they can erase the pain someone else is feeling. But the reality is, impact always matters more than intention. What we meant doesn't matter nearly as much as what actually happened. You can mean well and still cause harm. You can say something with the best of intentions and still deeply wound the person in front of you. And if your first instinct is to defend your intent rather than acknowledge the other person's experience, you're not really listening. You're protecting your ego. This is where so many relationships break down, not in the moment of conflict, but in the aftermath. When someone is brave enough to say, that hurt me, and the response is, well, that's not what I meant. Intent does not cancel out pain. In fact, when people are hurt and their pain is met with an explanation instead of empathy, it only makes the wound deeper. It tells them that how they feel is less important than how you want to be seen. And over time, that dynamic creates a gap that no amount of good intentions can bridge. People begin to feel like they have to translate their emotions into something more palatable just to be heard. They learn that their hurt won't be met with care, but with justification. Being in a relationship, any relationship, requires us to be responsible not just for our words and actions, but for how those words and actions land. That doesn't mean we walk on eggshells or live in fear of making mistakes. It means we stay open to feedback. We stay curious about how we affect others. And when we find out that something we said or did had a negative impact, we don't argue it, we acknowledge it, we own it. Because it's not about who we think we are, it's about how we show up for the people we claim to care about. The truth is, most people don't want perfection, they want presence. They want to feel like their emotions matter. They want to know that when they say, that didn't feel good, the person across from them will pause and take that seriously. It's not about blame. It's about being in a relationship where you're allowed to have your experience and be met with empathy rather than explanation. Intent is internal. It's invisible. Impact is what shows up in the real world. And if we're truly committed to love, to growth, to meaningful connection, then we must learn to prioritize the experience of the people we affect over our own self-impediment. That means saying, I didn't mean to hurt you, but I see that I did. I'm sorry. What do you need from me now? That moment right there, that's where trust is built. That's where healing begins. That's where love gets real. We all want to be understood. But part of being understood is being willing to understand others, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because love without accountability is fragile. And accountability only happens when we stop hiding behind our intentions and start showing up for our impact. So the next time someone tells you they were hurt by something you did, don't rush to defend. Don't minimize their experience. Pause. Listen. Reflect. Because in that pause, in that moment of humility, you have the power to turn conflict into connection and pain into progress. That's what it means to truly love someone, not just to intend well, but to do the work of making sure your love actually feels like love. Toxic love doesn't always look like shouting or manipulation. Often it's much quieter. It hides behind justifications, behind rehearsed apologies and recycled excuses. It says things like, this is how I am, or you're too sensitive, or I didn't mean it like that, and it expects that to be enough. Toxic love rarely takes responsibility. Instead, it creates a cycle where the same harm keeps happening, followed by the same excuses, and nothing ever changes. Over time, this erodes trust, safety, and self-worth. Excuses are the shield toxic love uses to avoid accountability. They sound reasonable on the surface, but underneath they're a refusal to grow, a refusal to look inward. When someone constantly explains away their behavior instead of facing the effect it has, they're not protecting the relationship, they're protecting their comfort. They're avoiding the discomfort of reflection, of vulnerability, of change. And any love that requires you to silence your pain for the sake of someone else's comfort is not love, it's emotional control. Healthy love doesn't hide, it faces, it listens, it leans in, it says, I see how that affected you, and I want to do better. Growth doesn't come from being right all the time, it comes from being willing to be wrong, to learn, to evolve. When love is healthy, it invites challenge, not as a threat, but as a pathway to deeper connection. It allows both people to speak their truth without fear of punishment, dismissal, or blame. And what separates healthy love from toxic love is not the absence of mistakes, it's the presence of ownership. Everyone messes up, everyone has moments where they say the wrong thing or act out of fear or insecurity, but what matters is what happens next. Toxic love makes excuses. Healthy love takes a breath, steps back, and says, I hurt you, that matters to me, let's talk about it. That moment, that shift from defensiveness to responsibility changes everything. Excuses are easy, growth is hard. It requires honesty, humility, and the willingness to sit with discomfort. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it means having conversations you don't want to have. Sometimes it means facing parts of yourself you'd rather ignore, but that's the work of love. Not grand gestures, not perfect compatibility, but the daily commitment to show up fully, to do better when you know better, and to treat your partner's experience with care, not contempt. The sad truth is that many people stay stuck in toxic love because the excuses feel familiar. The patterns are predictable. There's a strange sense of safety in knowing what to expect, even if it's painful. But familiarity is not the same as health. Repetition is not the same as growth. You can't heal in a place where harm is normalized and accountability is avoided. If someone keeps hurting you and calling it a mistake, but nothing ever changes, that's not a mistake. That's a decision. And love is not about accepting someone's decisions to harm you over and over again. Love is about mutual respect, mutual effort, mutual willingness to become better together. Real love isn't afraid of hard truths. It welcomes them because it knows that truth is the soil where trust grows. It doesn't run from the mess, it rolls up its sleeves and gets to work. It asks, What do I need to unlearn? How can I meet you better? What is this conflict trying to teach me? Toxic love hides behind the comfort of excuses. Healthy love steps into the discomfort of growth. And it's in that discomfort that real intimacy, real healing, and real connection are born. Because love is not a feeling, it's a daily choice. A choice to be honest, a choice to be accountable, a choice to grow. Denial is one of the most destructive forces in any relationship, especially the toxic ones. It doesn't scream or slam doors. It whispers. It rationalizes. It convinces you that things aren't as bad as they feel, that the tension in your chest is your imagination, that the repeated disrespect is just a rough patch. Denial becomes the quiet fuel that keeps unhealthy dynamics alive. It allows people to stay in situations that drain them, betray them, and slowly break them down. It gives toxicity room to breathe. What makes denial so dangerous is that it often feels like protection. It shields us from the pain of reality, from the truth that something or someone we care about is hurting us. It says, if I don't look too closely, maybe I won't have to deal with this. And so people stop naming what's happening. They minimize it, excuse it, or internalize it. Instead of asking, why am I being treated like this? They start asking, what's wrong with me? That's what denial does. It turns a toxic environment into a personal failing. In many toxic relationships, one or both people rely heavily on denial to keep the cycle going. The one doing the harm denies the impact of their actions. The one being hurt denies the depth of their suffering. Both participate in a kind of emotional avoidance, pretending things are normal when they're clearly not. And over time, the denial becomes so normalized that dysfunction starts to feel like love, chaos becomes comfort, pain becomes routine. But denial doesn't make anything go away. It only delays the consequences. The truth always finds its way to the surface. It shows up in anxiety, in resentment, in the way your energy shifts when they walk into the room. It shows up in your silence, in your hesitation to speak your needs, in the way you begin to shrink to fit a version of yourself they're more comfortable with. Denial keeps the outside looking okay, while the inside begins to unravel. Healthy relationships require truth. Not perfection, not constant agreement, but truth. A willingness to look honestly at what's working and what's not. To say this hurts without fear of being punished. To say we need to talk without being met with defensiveness or dismissal. In a toxic relationship, those truths are buried under layers of denial, because to face them would mean someone has to change. And toxic dynamics resist change. They depend on denial to maintain control and comfort. The longer someone stays in denial, the harder it becomes to leave. Not because they don't know something's wrong, but because they've spent so much time convincing themselves it's not that bad. They've tied their identity, their hope, and often their self-worth to a relationship that doesn't nurture them. And admitting the truth means not just seeing the other person clearly, it means seeing themselves clearly too. That's terrifying. But it's also the only path to freedom. The moment denial cracks, even a little, is the moment healing can begin. When someone finally says, this is not okay, they take their power back. When they stop defending the person who keeps hurting them and start defending their own well-being, the dynamic begins to shift. Not because the other person changed, but because they stopped feeding the system with silence and self-doubt. Denial is the oxygen of toxic relationships. It keeps dysfunction alive by keeping truth out. But once you let truth in, the air begins to change. It may be painful, it may be disorienting, but it is honest. And honesty is the first breath of something real, something healthier, something that might not look like what you had, but will finally feel like peace. Because you cannot heal what you won't admit. You cannot grow in soil poisoned by lies. Let the truth in and let the toxic die. Accountability is often misunderstood. People tend to associate it with blame or punishment, but in reality, accountability is one of the most powerful expressions of love and intimacy. It says, I care enough about you and about this relationship to own my impact. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present, being honest, and being willing to take responsibility when we fall short. In that way, accountability becomes a bridge to deeper connection, not a barrier. When someone is willing to say, I see how I hurt you, and I want to make it right, that vulnerability deepens trust. It shows that the relationship matters more than ego. That person isn't just invested in being seen as a good partner, they're invested in actually being one. And in a world where so many people deflect, deny, or avoid uncomfortable truths, someone who can say, you're right, I didn't handle that well, becomes rare and invaluable. Intimacy isn't built through grand gestures. It's built in the small, often messy moments where we choose truth over comfort. It's built in the courage to say, I messed up, without being asked. It's built in the willingness to sit with the discomfort of another person's hurt without rushing to defend ourselves. That level of emotional responsibility is hard. It requires humility, it requires self-awareness, but it also creates safety. The kind of safety where both people feel seen, heard, and respected. Without accountability, intimacy can't survive, because without it, trust slowly erodes. Patterns go unaddressed. Wounds go unacknowledged. One person begins to feel like they're always the one carrying the emotional weight of the relationship, while the other continues unchecked. This imbalance might not seem obvious at first, but over time it creates distance. And what once felt like closeness becomes tension disguised as peace. The beauty of accountability is that it invites growth, not just individually, but together. It says, we're in this relationship not just to feel good when things are easy, but to become better, stronger, more conscious partners when things are hard. It opens the door to learning, to understanding each other on deeper levels, to evolving through conflict instead of avoiding it. That's real intimacy, the kind where you can bring your full, flawed self to the table and know that honesty will be met with grace, not excuses, not silence, not blame. It's important to remember that accountability isn't just about apologizing. It's about change. Apologies mean little if the same behavior continues. True accountability sounds like, I understand now. I'm making changes because your experience matters to me. That's what tells someone you're not just hearing them, you're taking action to ensure they feel safe, respected, and valued. This kind of love takes effort. It takes emotional maturity. But the reward is deep connection. It's knowing that you are in a relationship where mistakes don't end everything, but they do matter. Where your voice is not just tolerated, it's honored. Where pain is not swept under the rug, but addressed, healed, and used as a catalyst for growth. Some people think avoiding hard conversations protects the relationship. In reality, it's the willingness to face those hard conversations with care and accountability that truly protects it. Because the truth is, love isn't just about how well you connect during the highs, it's about how responsibly you respond during the lows. Accountability is not weakness. It's not self-blame. It's strength. It's emotional leadership. It's the quiet, steady work of turning love into something reliable, something lasting, something real. When both people in a relationship are willing to be accountable, they're not just growing love, they're building something unbreakable.